Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Keep Indiana Learning. My name is Tim Arnold, and I'm a digital learning coach with Keep Indiana Learning. And today I'm here with my fellow digital learning coaches, Brenny and Sara Atkinson, for the third episode of our book study series, Keep Indiana Reading, The Shift to Student-Led Edition. This book written by Katie Novak and Catlin Tucker. Today our focus will be Chapter 3, which is entitled From Reading as a Solitary Endeavor to Reading for Connection. But before we dive in, let's do some introductions. So Brenny and Sara, take it away.
I can go first, Sara. So hi, everyone. I'm Brenny Coomer. I'm a digital learning coach along with my two wonderful co-hosts today. I'm also the Assistant Director of Educational Technology in Columbus, Indiana for Bartholomew Consolidated School Corporation. And I love talking about this book, have background in Universal Design for Learning, and I'm super excited to talk about this chapter.
And my name is Sara Atkinson. Thank you, both of you, for having put this on and giving me the opportunity to join in. I am the Instructional Technology Coordinator for Doolan School Corporation, which is located in Chesterton, Indiana. And in a previous life, I served as an instructional coach and also a classroom teacher. So this book has very, very much interested me, and I'm really excited to talk about it today.
Great. Thanks for joining me, guys. My name is Tim Arnold. I'm from Richmond Community Schools, 34 years in public education, 26 in the classroom, and the last 8 as a district e-learning specialist. In addition to being a digital learning coach here for Keep Indiana Learning, I'm also a board member for HEC. And with that, we are ready to take off and talk about this wonderful book and Chapter 3. And right from the get-go, the authors described a book club that they were in. And what they noticed about their own book club was that there were so many different modalities. People that were reading, people that were listening, audiobooks, people that were taking notes on any form of digital or paper item. And people had their own note-taking system for special symbols and notes along the way. But the key was they were all engaged and they were all talking about it based on their engagement. And that's really, I think, the focus of this chapter. That we try to remove as many of those barriers as we can, because we all know when we get into school, there are so many limitations, whether it be the number of books we have or the time that we have. And for students, that translates to little or no choice, little or no differentiation, having to use large chunks of class time if you can't send the books away, and ultimately one pace for everybody. And so that's really what this chapter is about, trying to end or fix or at least modify a little bit. Brenny, I know that UDL and removing barriers is one of your sweet spots and one of your loves. So what do you think about this chapter and maybe that first strategy?
I love this chapter. I feel like I'm going to say that every single time I'm on here, but I love this one because I'm someone who loves to read for fun. I'm in book clubs. This is my jam, totally up my alley. But I love this chapter because they talk about just some of the stigmas I think that come with different types of reading, and that some types of reading aren't always perceived as being as equal as others. And I think that we all need to fight against those stigmas. And I'm someone who loves audiobooks. I had so many students who love to read with their ears, and that was engaging for them. And I love that they talked about that from their own personal experiences, and then just some of the things I've seen in the classroom. So in thinking about from a Universal Design for Learning perspective, Katie Novak kind of touched on this a little bit at the start of the chapter, but the birth of UDL really came from reading and recognizing that we need to give students different options to engage with text. UDL is all about removing barriers so all of our students can be successful. It originally started in special education. CAST, C-A-S-T, is the founding group of UDL, and it used to be called the Center for Applied Special Technology. And their work was championing different ways of giving students alternatives to print text. So if you're someone who loves UDL in the background of it, this chapter really digs into one of UDL's initial core values. And the first strategy, talking about making shared text accessible, is something that, like Tim said, that is like my sweet spot. I get on my soapbox with that quite a bit, because print text on its own is a learning resource, but print is probably one of the least accessible things you can give your student on its own. There's so many ways you can level up better, right? You can do audiobooks, you can give students access to text to speech, so many different things. And I love that they gave pointers for how to do that. Almost all of us have access to some types of these tools in our classrooms, as do our students. And it's just these very small, simple things can add up and make a really big difference. And I know, Sarah, you love talking about this topic as well. And accessibility is something that you've been super into. So I wondered what your insights were on this chapter and some of these strategies too.
Yeah, so I agree with you, Brenny, that the power of the read aloud is something that you shouldn't underestimate. And the author brought up some very useful digital tools. In addition to those, they offered something simple like, can your students read to one another? Or is this something you could read aloud to your students? Or if an audiobook isn't available online, you could record yourself reading it. So it can be something very digital, and it can also be something very analog as well. Something that also stood out to me big time in this chapter was the idea of opening up opportunities for students to have agency. So when we give them all of these different tools and different ways of absorbing information and reading information, are we giving them the space to choose the one that they prefer to use? And so I know some of the later strategies we're going to talk about are going to get into that. So I don't want to ruin the surprise too much. But in our long-term goals with our students, it's just to try to give them opportunities to do behaviors that experts do. So in the book, they gave this really cool table, and it listed out exactly what kinds of behaviors expert readers engage in. And so what can we do to make sure that all of our students get to engage in those? And a lot of those are reflective. And we know that reflection helps students to identify what works best for them. So when we're giving them all of these different tools to use, are we really engaging them in this reflection and identifying the ones that work best for them, but also helping them to understand how they can stretch themselves too? So I thought that that was really empowering to read. And this idea that we kind of have the same goal for all of our students, it's just, how are we helping them to get there?
Yeah, I love that. That self-analysis and self-assessment piece, which if you're following along in the book is on pages 78, 79. There are actual forms there that Sara referenced that you can take and use or modify. Very powerful part of that opening of the book. The quote that stopped me in my tracks was, reading is an exchange of views between the reader and the writer. And yeah, it is, but it's got to be accessible. It's got to be engaging. And so it's going to require on our part as teachers some flexibility and choice for our kids. And to me, that we really got to the heart of that flexibility and choice when they introduced strategy number 2, which was allowing students to select texts. And I got to admit, as a guy who spent a lot of time in a social studies classroom with document-based questions or DBQs, my mind was blown. Well, yeah, why not? Why not? Based on their learning, you find something that would be great in that DBQ, something that reflects their identity and speaks to their experiences, and some sort of choice in how they're going to engage with the text that they're choosing. And then finally, some choice in demonstrating their comprehension of the text. You know, you think about a choice board, but I was stopped in my tracks thinking, what a missed opportunity for me that I didn't have student options or student choices in that list of DBQ questions that they could have really worked together. And then I really love the idea of maybe a round of collaborative annotations or group sketch notes, or read, pause, discuss, repeat, all as parts of or previous to really diving into that really strong anchor text. So I'm a very happy about strategy 2. I'm also a little sad that I haven't used those things yet. So it's something I set as a goal for myself.
Well, and I think something to piggyback off of what you just said, Tim, is I think sometimes we get so tied up in like, I mean, I was a social studies teacher as well. I had these primary sources my students had to read, and I was like, they have to read this one, when really there's so many other primary sources along the same theme that they could have selected from. So yes, I need to have my students read a certain type of text or from a certain time period, but giving some options in that specific text can be a really small thing to do. And those can add up. And maybe if you're intimidated by that, or you're just a little overwhelmed, you can maybe start it and maybe like one lesson and then build from there and ask for student feedback along the way. And then I also love the idea of group annotating and really digging into that text as a small group. I don't feel like I did very much of that when I was in the classroom. So I kind of had that same feeling that you did, Tim, but with this part, I'm like, oh my gosh, when you're going through school, those primary grades, you're learning how to read, and then you're really reading to learn from moving on, and the texts only get more challenging. So giving students the built-in scaffolding of working together on those strategies is just a wonderful chef's kiss idea from the authors. And I was like highlighting that like crazy because I'm like, why did I not do that?
And to piggyback off of that, the text also points out, and this was a quote that I wrote down for me to reference a lot later, that when you give students the opportunity to select texts, co-create using text sets or some other activities we're going to talk about, they're more likely to take ownership of their own learning and to begin to intuitively ask more of those reflective questions. So I know I'm coming from an elementary education background, and so I know in that setting it's really tempting to really control what the students are reading because of that idea of, are they fluent enough yet to get into certain texts? But even within like a certain range of book levels, you can give the students a lot of opportunity to choose, but then also making sure that the students get the chance to pick up those fun reads. And even though they aren't maybe reading all of it independently, are they getting information from pictures? Are they listening to audio texts online? So it's not just about making sure they're in this like just right zone all the time. It's trying to balance that out with, are they having opportunities to choose and get really excited about reading?
Yeah, I love that idea. There was a quote as we kind of transitioned into strategy 3 that I read that said, closely reading any text, whether written or visual, requires that students proceed more slowly and methodically, noticing details, making connections, and asking questions. But the key part was the end that said, this takes practice. And I think that's so important that these are skills to teach along the way. And so I think what we just talked about segues really well into strategy 3, which was co-creating text sets. Again, missed opportunity for Tim is something I'm going to rectify here, but it emphasizes it's really important for you as the teacher maybe to pick the anchor text, the one that you think is the most important. But then the other things, short texts or maps or artwork or videos or timelines or political cartoons or whatever it is, there's no reason students shouldn't and couldn't have some choice in that. So they talked a lot about co-creating supplemental text with your students, reducing your workload. Hooray for that. Who's not getting in line for that? But you're also at the same time increasing the relevance and authenticity and meaning for your students. And again, light bulb moment for me, we're at a Canvas district. So any of you that are at a Canvas district as your LMS, we've got this beautiful new question type in new quizzes called the stimulus question. And oh my gosh, so many opportunities for these student texts. Can you imagine students hopping into a quiz or a test and their text is a part of the stimulus question? I think that would be so awesome. And that's something I'm going to try to pull off here in the near future.
That would be awesome to log in and see that it's the text you picked.
Yeah.
I love it. I like, what a great way to build some inquiry too, and to like boost some excitement about maybe like some of those, and this is social studies coming out again, some of those really dry texts from, a couple hundred years ago. Tim's nodding his head because he knows, like, Articles of Confederation are not a fun, super great, exciting read for high school students. And giving them the opportunity to come up with some multimedia resources or even like memes to represent what some of those points are, kids will love that. And maybe you do that as a bell ringer, and then the next few days, throw those up in front of the class. They see theirs on the screen, almost like that stimulus question. You discuss it and how it connects to that text or that reading. So many fun ways you can take that.
And I know from the elementary standpoint, letting students play a role in creating those text sets can look a little bit differently. Maybe there are themes that you're knowledgeable about, but maybe your students aren't there yet. So it could be a matter of you've chosen a larger number of texts for them, and then they're getting to vote or getting to pick the one that looks good to them. Or even if you have like a cadet teacher or a university student that volunteers in your classroom, that could be a great opportunity for them to get to know the students better and choose books that are responsive to their interests and their needs. So it may not be a matter of every grade level can, on a regular basis, have students help with selection like that, but you can still use this, what you know about your students, to pick texts that are likely to kind of pique their interest.
Yeah, strategy 4 and strategy 5. Strategy 4 was shift the pacing of reading to the students. And strategy 5 was that you have students pick reading goals that they want to focus on. I thought both of those were enlightening for me to go through and read. What did you guys think about those two?
I love those too. I think maybe I wasn't always the greatest at giving some of the control of pacing of reading to students. Like I would set a timer on the screen, and then it was like, okay, when the timer's up, we're moving on, like whether they were ready or not, which always wasn't the greatest. And maybe that's like me being a little too type A and knowing like this is a block of time that we're moving forward with. But I love that. And then I really liked the chart that they had with the different reading goal, like prompts and questions to ask. I think those are amazing. And I know that, having students reflect on their reading and setting goals, it's a higher order level of thinking. It's very metacognitive, and it's always something that we should have students do. But sometimes coming up with those questions on our own isn't always the easiest. So this is just quick grab and go, and you can use it right away.
Something that kind of reminded me of something from the past was strategy 4. They mentioned in the text that different blended learning models can help you to pull that off. And I know back in the day, this was before COVID, this was a long time ago, we were really steeping ourselves in all the different ways you could flip your classroom and do things in class, and ways that you can have your students, instead of all following along the same lesson, same pace, same time, but leverage technology in order to make sure everybody's still learning. This is when you get to plug those techniques in and kind of dust those off the shelf and put it to good use. So I was reminded of an in-class flip and how you can have students working on one thing while maybe you're working with a group of students on a specific reading goal. And I thought it was really cool that they offered the suggestion of letting students pick the skills that they want to work on. But if maybe you have students that aren't there yet, or you're worried about students picking something that maybe is something they've already mastered and pretty easy for them, having that balance between must do and can do, so that we're scaffolding them and moving them toward picking the right strategy at the right time, but still making ourselves feel secure in that they're getting the skills that they need. So I think this idea of balance keeps popping up. I don't know what you guys think, but this idea that maybe if you're not 100% ready, there's something you can do to get started.
Yeah, absolutely. That strategy 4 made me think a lot about things like playlists and choice boards and things that would give kids a little bit of freedom within my schedule to kind of plan their own day. Maybe there were 3 things, and long term, we're going to work on this for 3 days or a week or however long. So in between there, they can design their own time. And if they want more time to read today, have at it. I too, Brenny, I'm guilty as charged. I had the schedule of the chapters and the pages, and here we're going to plow. Yeah. Embarrassed to say it, but I was there. I was there with some of our longer reads or some of our novels and stuff like that in history class.
Well, this is why it's so great to have these book studies, because when you know better, you can do better, right?
That's right. That's right. So overarching ideas here, as we wind this up, no matter which of the strategies spoke the most to you, all of these things are great examples of firm goals and flexible means. We're still expecting a lot out of our students, which I think is key, but we're going to be very flexible on our means that removes barriers and helps them get to where we would like them to be. Knowing they're not all going to make it at the same time, totally okay. But we're going to provide as many avenues and choices and paths and paces as we can to get them there. So at the end of each of these, we like to offer some reflection questions. And so for chapter 3, 3 of these that came as a part of the book, which of the 5 strategies presented today in this chapter resonated with you? What is it you think you could take and use tomorrow? What type of text do your students currently read? And how might you be able to vary those or make some changes or some additions? And how do you assess their understanding of those texts? Very important to consider. And then third, what potential barriers exist that might make it challenging for students to engage with a reading or complete a reading task? And how could we eliminate those barriers? And I hope that we've given a little insight from the book on that, but I'm sure there's much more as you dig into chapter 3. Thank you so much for joining us. And we will be back in 2 weeks. And this session and all sessions will be in a playlist on the Keep Indiana Learning YouTube channel. So you can catch any of those there, revisit them if you need to. But until next time, Brenny and Sara, thanks so much for joining me, and have a great evening.